A supply road cutting through dense forest just outside the border of the Land of Fire. A summer evening, the kind where the heat clings to your skin even after the sun starts dipping behind the tree line. Four shinobi walking in loose formation, laughing about nothing in particular, completely unaware that in the next 20 minutes, one of them is going to make a decision that rewrites everything the elemental nations think they know about the Nine Tails. If you've been following this channel, you know Team 7 has survived a lot of impossible situations. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares them for what happens on this road. Before we get into it, if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this series is about to get wild, and you don't want to miss where it goes. Now, let's rewind about 6 hours. The mission had been simple on paper. Deliver medical supplies to a small outpost village near the border, confirm the safety of the trade route, and return to Konoha by nightfall the next day. C rank, low risk, practically a formality. Tsunade had assigned it to Team 7 partly because they needed the experience working together as a 4-person unit again, and partly, though she'd never admit this out loud, because she wanted to give them something easy after the brutal string of missions they'd just come off of. Naruto Uzumaki walked at the front, hands laced behind his head, chattering about the size of the beef skewers he was going to order the second they got back to the village. Sakura Haruno walked beside him, half listening, half scanning the medical supply scroll in her hands to make sure nothing had shifted in the pack during the trip. Sai trailed a few steps behind, sketchbook tucked under one arm, quiet as always, occasionally glancing at Naruto with the faint, permanent curiosity of someone still learning what normal human interaction was supposed to look like. And at the rear, Sasuke Uchiha walked with his hands in his pockets, eyes half-lidded, radiating the specific brand of irritation that came from being stuck on a mission this beneath him. "You're quiet," Naruto said, glancing back at Sasuke. "I'm always quiet," Sasuke said. "You're just loud enough that it feels like a contrast." "See, that's the kind of comment that makes people think you don't like me." "I don't." Sakura sighed without looking up from the scroll. "Can you two not do this for one mission?" "Just one?" "He started it," Naruto said. "I didn't say anything," Sasuke said. "That's exactly the problem." Sai tilted his head, watching the exchange with polite fascination, the way someone might watch two birds fighting over a piece of bread. "In my studies," he offered, "I read that teammates who bicker like this often have deep, unspoken affection for one another." 3 heads turned toward him at once. "Don't," Sasuke said flatly. "Please never say that again," Sakura added. Naruto just grinned, because honestly, he agreed with Sai, even if he never say it that directly. It was a good moment. A normal moment. The kind of moment you remember fondly later, specifically because of what happens next. Because about 400 meters ahead, hidden in the thick brush lining both sides of the trade road, 6 shinobi from a rogue mercenary cell known as the Keshu Group were watching them approach, and every single one of those 6 had been hired, trained, and equipped for one specific purpose: to kill Team 7. Or at minimum, to capture one of them alive. Here's what Team 7 didn't know yet, and what you, watching this, are about to find out before they do. The Keshu Group wasn't some random bandit outfit looking for an easy score. They'd been contracted weeks in advance by a broker with connections deep enough to know Team 7's rough patrol schedule. Their orders were specific: engage Team 7 away from any village, use everything at their disposal, and if given the opportunity, capture Naruto Uzumaki alive for a client who had gone suspiciously quiet on the details of why. Whoever that client was, they'd done their homework. The 6 operatives weren't ordinary Chunin-level fighters. They were a coordinated unit built around one uncomfortable truth. Team 7's biggest strength was that they fought as a unit, covering each other's weaknesses. So the Keshu Group had built a strategy specifically to break that cohesion apart, piece by piece, before finishing them off individually. It should have worked. It almost did. The first sign of trouble was a whistle, a single, short note that didn't belong to any bird native to the region. Sasuke caught it half a second before anyone else, his body going rigid mid-step. "Down," he snapped, and the team dropped without hesitation, years of instinct kicking in before conscious thought even caught up. A volley of Saban needles hissed through the space where their throats had been a heartbeat earlier, burying themselves in the trunk of a cedar tree with a sound like rapid hail. "Ambush!" Sakura shouted, already reaching for a kunai. They didn't have time for anything more coordinated than that, because the tree line exploded with movement. 2 Keshu operatives dropped from the canopy directly onto Sai, forcing him to scramble backward while summoning an Ink Hawk mid-motion to intercept a follow-up strike. A third came in low and fast toward Sakura, forcing her into a brutal exchange of taijutsu that she only barely kept pace with. A fourth and fifth surged toward Naruto and Sasuke together, clearly intending to isolate the two of them from the others immediately. And the sixth, the one nobody saw until it was almost too late, stayed hidden, watching, waiting for an opening to strike at whoever became vulnerable first. "They're not messing around," Naruto said, deflecting a strike aimed at his ribs and countering with a shadow clone that dissolved almost as fast as it appeared. "This isn't some random bandit thing." "No kidding," Sasuke muttered, weaving through an attack and retaliating with a chakra-charged palm strike that sent his opponents skidding backward. They came prepared. For a few minutes, it actually looked like Team 7 had it under control. This was, after all, a squad that had fought S-rank threats and survived. 6 mercenaries, however well-trained, shouldn't have been able to match them. But then the poison hit. It happened fast. A saban grazed along Sakura's forearm during a close exchange, barely more than a scratch, easy to shrug off in the heat of battle. She didn't even register it as a real hit. But less than a minute later, her vision blurred, her limbs grew heavy, and her chakra control, the one thing she relied on more than raw strength, started slipping through her fingers like sand. "Sakura!" Naruto's voice cracked with alarm as he saw her stumble mid-strike, barely avoiding a follow-up blow. "I'm fine," she gritted out, though the way she swayed said otherwise. That was the opening the Kesha group had been waiting for. With brutal, practiced coordination, they shifted their entire strategy the instant they saw Sakura falter, 3 of them converging on her position, while the remaining 3 redirected to keep Naruto, Sasuke, and Sai-2 occupied to help. It was exactly the kind of surgical, team-breaking tactic that should never have worked against shinobi of their caliber. Except the poison wasn't just slowing Sakura down. It was designed to spread through contact, and in the chaos of close-quarters combat, a second graze against Sai's exposed forearm delivered a fresh dose into his system too. His ink creations, which relied on precise chakra flow to maintain their form, began to destabilize, collapsing into puddles of useless pigment at the worst possible moments. Within the span of about 90 seconds, which, if you've never been in a real fight, feels like an eternity, Team 7 went from holding their own to being systematically dismantled. "Sai, fall back!" Sasuke barked, cutting down an attacker with a Chidori-charged blade before pivoting to catch Sakura as she stumbled again. "I can still," Sai started, and then his knees buckled as the poison hit its stride, dragging him down hard enough that he couldn't fully catch himself. Naruto's mind was racing now, doing the math that every shinobi learns to do under pressure. How many enemies? How much time? How much strength left? How do we get out of this alive? The numbers weren't adding up in their favor. "Naruto!" Sasuke's voice cut through the noise, sharp with something Naruto had rarely heard from him, real concern. "We need an opening, now!" Naruto didn't answer. He was already moving, throwing himself directly into the path of the 3 attackers converging on Sakura, using every reserve of raw speed and stamina he had left to buy even a few seconds of breathing room. It cost him. A blade opened a long gash across his side. A follow-up strike cracked into his ribs hard enough that he heard something give. He kept moving anyway, because stopping wasn't an option, not with Sakura barely conscious behind him and Sai struggling just to stay upright. Here's where things get bad. Like really bad. Because the 6th operative, the one who'd been hanging back the entire fight, watching, waiting, finally made his move. And his target wasn't Naruto, it was Sasuke. A precise, brutal strike to the back of Sasuke's skull, delivered in the exact half-second his attention was split between defending Sakura and watching Naruto's reckless charge. Sasuke went down hard, and though he tried to push himself back up, his body simply wouldn't respond fast enough. "Sasuke!" Naruto's voice cracked, and that's when the poison, cumulative now, spreading through 3 separate members of the team from 3 separate contact points, hit its true peak. Sakura's breathing turned shallow and rapid. Sai stopped moving altogether, chest rising in slow, labored intervals. Sasuke, still trying to force himself upright, found his limbs simply refusing the command, his own chakra network scrambled by the toxin now coursing through it. Naruto stood alone in the middle of the road, bleeding from at least 3 separate wounds, facing down 6 enemies who'd successfully done exactly what they'd been hired to do: isolate him from every single person who could help him. Well, one of the Keshu operatives said, circling slowly, almost lazily now that victory was in sight. That was easier than we thought it'd be. Naruto's hands trembled. Not from fear, from sheer exhaustion. Chakra reserves scraped nearly bare from the fight and from 3 separate shadow clone waves he'd thrown out trying to buy his team time. He looked at Sakura, pale and barely conscious. At Sai, whose breathing had gone dangerously shallow. At Sasuke, forcing his eyes open through sheer stubbornness, unable to do anything more than that. And Naruto understood, with total clarity, that if something didn't change in the next few seconds, all 3 of them were going to die in front of him. And he wouldn't have the strength left to stop it. Now, if you know anything about what lives inside Naruto, you know this is exactly the kind of moment where Kurama usually steps in. A surge of red chakra, a burst of raw power, problem solved, roll credits. But this time was different. And here's why. Kurama's chakra was already stretched thin. Naruto had drawn on it heavily just minutes earlier trying to hold the line, and the fox, whatever grudging respect it had built for its host over the years, wasn't in the business of handing out unlimited power for free. There was a ceiling. And Naruto had already scraped up against it. Come on, Naruto muttered under his breath, sinking into a defensive stance as the 6 Keshu operatives began closing in for what they clearly intended to be the finishing blow. Come on, come on, come on. Inside him, deep in the seal, Kurama's voice rumbled with something between irritation and reluctant urgency. You've already taken more than I normally allow, brat. Push harder and you'll burn through what's holding your own chakra coils together. I don't have a choice. Naruto snapped out loud, drawing confused looks from the approaching enemies, who had no idea he was arguing with a 9-tailed fox mid-battle. There's always a choice, Kurama said. Just maybe not one you'll like. The first operative lunged. Naruto barely twisted aside in time, red chakra flaring instinctively around his hand as he retaliated, and for just a fraction of a second, something strange happened. The chakra didn't just wrap around his fist the way it normally did. It stretched. Reached, as if some deep, animal part of it was trying to extend toward the 3 unconscious, dying teammates lying just a few feet away. Naruto felt it too, a pull, faint but undeniable, like a string tugging at the center of his chest. Don't, Kurama warned, voice suddenly sharp with alarm. Naruto. Whatever you're thinking. Don't. What is that? Naruto gasped, staggering back from a follow-up strike, barely deflecting it. What's happening? It's a fracture point, Kurama said, and for the first time in longer than Naruto could remember, the ancient fox actually sounded uncertain. There's a way to push chakra out through the seal in pieces instead of as a whole. It's never meant to be used. It's dangerous, unstable, and if you do it wrong, will it save them? Naruto cut in, blocking another strike with his forearm, feeling his knees start to buckle from the accumulated damage. Silence for half a second that felt like an hour. Possibly, Kurama admitted. But it isn't like lending chakra for a jutsu. If you fracture it and push it into another body, it doesn't come back the same way. It binds. Permanently. You'd be giving away pieces of me that I will never get back in the same form. 2 more operatives closed in. Naruto was on one knee now, blood running freely from the gash in his side, his vision starting to swim at the edges. He looked at Sakura. At Sai. At Sasuke, who was still trying, uselessly, to drag himself upright to help, refusing to just lie there and watch. Do it, Naruto said. Naruto, do it! What happened next took less than 4 seconds, but if you slowed it down, frame by frame, it would look something like this. A blinding pulse of red-orange chakra erupted from Naruto's chest, not in the familiar cloak shape everyone expected, but in 3 distinct branching arcs, like lightning splitting apart mid-strike. The Keshu operatives closing in on him were caught directly in the blast radius, sent flying backward by raw force before they even understood what they were looking at. The 3 arcs of chakra didn't dissipate. They stretched across the battlefield with unnatural purpose, converging on Sakura, Sai, and Sasuke simultaneously, and then, impossibly, sank directly into their chests, disappearing beneath their skin like water absorbed into dry earth. For one suspended, silent moment, nothing happened at all. Then Sakura's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly orange at the edges. Sai gasped a sudden, sharp breath, color rushing back into his face as the poison in his system was violently burned away by something that felt like fire moving through his veins. And Sasuke, still on the ground, still barely conscious, felt something ancient and enormous settle into the empty spaces of his own chakra network, filling gaps he hadn't even known were there. The remaining Kesho operatives, the ones who hadn't been caught directly in the blast, froze in place, staring at three shinobi who a moment ago had been half dead and were now radiating a chakra signature that felt, unmistakably, like something none of them had been paid nearly enough to fight. What one of them managed is that he didn't get an answer. Sakura moved first, faster than she'd ever moved in her life, closing the distance in a blur and driving a chakra-enhanced fist into the ground beside her nearest attacker hard enough to crater the earth and send him flying through 2 trees. Sai followed, his half-collapsed ink hawk suddenly reforming with a strange, almost aggressive vitality, snapping at the remaining operatives with something that looked disturbingly close to real hunger. And Sasuke, chakra network no longer scrambled but instead humming with unfamiliar new strength, pushed himself up off the ground and finished the fight with a single Chidori strike that ended things before the last operative could even finish drawing his weapon. Within 30 seconds, all 6 members of the Kesha group were down. Not dead, Team 7 didn't kill unless there was no other option, but thoroughly, completely defeated. Naruto collapsed onto his back in the middle of the road, staring up at a darkening sky, chest heaving, every muscle in his body screaming with exhaustion. "It's done," Kurama said quietly, and there was something strange in the fox's voice now. Not anger. Not quite fear either. Something closer to disbelief. "It's actually done." "Told you," Naruto rasped, allowing himself a weak, exhausted grin. "Worked out fine." "You don't understand," Kurama said. "You don't understand what you just did." For a few minutes, nobody spoke. Sakura sat down hard beside Naruto, staring at her own hands like she didn't recognize them, watching faint threads of orange chakra flicker across her skin before settling and fading from visible sight, though not disappearing entirely. Sai stood a short distance away, equally silent, staring at the ink hawk still circling protectively overhead with far more independent motion than it should have had. And Sasuke, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed, looked down at his own hands with an expression Naruto had never seen on him before. Something that looked almost like fear. "Naruto," Sakura finally said, voice unsteady. "What did you do?" "I saved you," Naruto said, pushing himself up into a sitting position with a wince. "All of you? You were dying. I wasn't gonna just watch that happen." "That's not what I asked." Sakura held up her hand, and all 4 of them watched as faint orange light traced briefly along her fingers before settling back into stillness. "This isn't a jutsu you cast on us. This feels permanent." Naruto opened his mouth to reassure her, to say something confident and Naruto-shaped, the way he always did. Nothing came out, because inside his head, Kurama was still talking, and what the fox was saying made the grin slide slowly off Naruto's face. "I told you it would bind," Kurama said, low and serious in a way Naruto rarely heard. "I told you there was no clean version of this. What you just did wasn't lending chakra. It was cutting off 3 pieces of me and sealing them permanently into 3 other people. That's not something that reverses because you feel bad about it later." "Permanent? How permanent?" Naruto asked out loud, and the other 3 immediately turned to stare at him. "Permanent? How permanent? What?" Sasuke asked flatly. "Who are you talking to?" Naruto swallowed hard, looking at each of them in turn. Sakura, pale but alive. Sai, breathing steady, alive. Sasuke, standing on his own 2 feet, alive. All 3 of them very clearly alive, which had absolutely not been guaranteed 20 minutes ago. But also, all 3 of them now carrying something inside them that had never belonged to anyone but Naruto, and one very old, very powerful fox. "I think," Naruto said slowly, "we need to have a really long conversation on the way home." They made camp early, still miles from the nearest safe outpost, too exhausted and too rattled to push further that night. Sakura tended to Naruto's wounds with hands that moved with unnerving precision, faster, more instinctive than her training should have allowed, the injuries closing at a rate that made even her own eyes widen in surprise. Sai sat near the fire, sketching quietly, though the ink on his page seemed to shimmer faintly in the firelight in a way it never had before. Sasuke stood apart from the others, staring into the darkness of the tree line, flexing his hands slowly, feeling out the edges of something new and enormous settled deep inside his own chakra network. It doesn't feel like poison anymore, Sakura said quietly, mostly to herself, watching the last of the wound on Naruto's side seal shut beneath her glowing hands. It doesn't feel like anything I've trained for. It just works. Like it's always been part of me. Same, Sai said, not looking up from his sketchbook. The ink responds differently now. Faster. It's almost like it wants to move on its own. Sasuke said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw said enough. Naruto sat by the fire, staring at his own hands, feeling the strange, hollow ache where a piece of Kurama's chakra used to sit undivided. It wasn't gone. He could still feel the fox, could still feel that deep, familiar presence curled somewhere in the seal. But something had changed. Something had been given away, permanently, to people who hadn't asked for it, and had no idea what it truly meant to carry it. I need to tell you guys something, Naruto said finally, and the quiet weight in his voice was enough to make even Sasuke turn to look at him. About what just happened back there. About what's inside you now. Sakura's hand stilled. Sai closed his sketchbook. Sasuke pushed off from the tree he'd been leaning against and walked closer to the fire. We're listening, Sakura said. Naruto took a breath, opened his mouth to explain everything, the fox, the fracture, the permanence of it, the fact that none of them had signed up for this, and he wasn't entirely sure he'd had any right to make that choice for them, even to save their lives. And that's exactly when a voice, ancient, furious, and unmistakably not human, roared inside Naruto's skull loud enough that his entire body flinched, drawing startled looks from all three of his teammates. Do you have any idea what you've just done to me? Do you have any idea what you've just done to me? The roar tore through Naruto's skull with enough force that he physically flinched, nearly toppling backward off the log he was sitting on. Sakura, Sai, and Sasuke all watched him with matching expressions of alarm as his hands flew up to his head. Naruto? Sakura's voice was sharp with concern, medical instincts kicking in even through her own exhaustion. What's wrong, Kurama? Naruto managed through gritted teeth. He's not happy. At all. Not happy doesn't begin to cover it, Kurama snarled inside him, and Naruto could feel the fox's chakra churning violently in the seal, agitated in a way he'd rarely felt before, not even during their worst fights. You tore 3 pieces off me and scattered them into 3 separate bodies without so much as asking whether that was something I could survive. Naruto's stomach dropped. Wait. Survive? You said it was dangerous, you didn't say it could kill you. I said there was no clean version of this, Kurama snapped. I didn't have time to explain the full weight of it, because you were about to watch your teammates die, and frankly, brat, either did I. Do you understand what I am? I am not 4 separate rivers you can split off a larger lake. I am one being. Whole. Every fracture is a piece of me that no longer answers only to itself. So what happens now? Naruto asked, out loud this time, drawing confused looks from his teammates, who could only hear his half of the conversation. Are you gonna be okay? There was a long pause. Long enough that Naruto's chest tightened with something close to real fear. I don't know, Kurama admitted finally, and that admission alone was somehow more unsettling than the anger had been. I have never been fractured before. No tailed beast has, not in a way that survived the process. I am, as of tonight, an experiment neither of us agreed to run. Naruto swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I didn't have another choice. They were dying, Kurama. All 3 of them. I know, Kurama said, quieter now, some of the fury bleeding out into something heavier, something almost resigned. I know why you did it. That does not make it less reckless. It does not undo what's already been done. We are past the point of debating whether it was the right call. Now we simply have to live with what it means. And what does it mean? Naruto pressed. That, Kurama said, is what we're all about to find out. Naruto relayed as much of the conversation as he could to the others, sitting hunched by the fire while Sakura, Sai, and Sasuke listened in a silence that grew heavier with every sentence. When he finished, nobody spoke for a long moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the trees, a night bird called out and went quiet again. "So let me make sure I understand this," Sasuke said finally, his voice carefully flat in the way it always got when he was working very hard to sound calmer than he felt. "You're telling me there's a piece of the Nine Tails sealed inside me. Permanently. And nobody, not you, not the fox himself, actually knows what that means long term." "Yeah," Naruto said. "Basically." "Great," Sasuke said, in a tone that suggested it was, in fact, not great at all. "I healed faster," Sakura said quietly, holding her hands up and studying them again in the firelight. "Back there. That wasn't just adrenaline. I could feel the wound closing under my own chakra like I'd trained for it my whole life, and I haven't." "My ink moved on its own," Sai added, still turning his sketchbook over in his hands like it might offer an explanation the rest of them couldn't. "It's not supposed to do that. Chakra-infused ink follows the caster's intent. It shouldn't have independent motion." "It's not gone," Naruto said slowly, trying to piece together what little Kurama had actually told him. "The chakra Kurama gave you, it's not a temporary boost. It's part of you now, the way it used to only be part of me. That's why it feels natural instead of borrowed." "How permanent is permanent?" Sakura asked, echoing the exact question that had made Kurama go quiet with fury back on the road. Naruto hesitated. "I don't know. He doesn't fully know either. This isn't something that's ever happened before." Sasuke let out a short, humorless breath through his nose. "So basically, all four of us are now part of an experiment that has no precedent, no safety net, and no idea what happens next." "When you say it like that, it sounds bad," Naruto muttered. "It is bad, Naruto," Sasuke said, and there was an edge to his voice now that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far off either. "You made a decision that changed all three of our bodies without consulting a single one of us. You were unconscious and dying." Naruto snapped back, some of his own guilt curdling into defensiveness. "There wasn't exactly time for a group vote." "I'm not saying you should have let us die," Sasuke shot back, pushing off from the tree he'd been leaning against, chakra flickering faintly orange at the edges of his clenched fist without him seeming to notice. "I'm saying you don't get to make choices like this, and then act surprised when we have questions about it." The orange flicker around Sasuke's hand seemed to catch even him off guard. He stopped, staring down at his own fingers, flexing them slowly as the chakra faded back beneath his skin. Sakura's eyes had gone wide, watching it happen. "Sasuke. Did you feel that?" "Feel what?" Sasuke said too quickly. "That," Sakura said, gesturing at his hand. "You're not even trying to use it, and it's just responding to your emotions, maybe?" Sai tilted his head, studying Sasuke with clinical interest. "In my observation, heightened emotional states in Naruto have historically correlated with increased access to Kurama's chakra. It would track that the same correlation might now apply to all of us." "Wonderful," Sasuke muttered. "So now I have to worry about my own temper making me glow." "I mean," Naruto offered, trying and failing to lighten the mood, "you've always kind of had a temper problem." "Don't," Sasuke said flatly, and Naruto wisely dropped it. They sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of everything settling over the campsite like the cold creeping in with the dark. Eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety, and they took turns keeping watch through the night, though none of them slept particularly well. The trip back to Konoha the next day was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue and everything to do with the fact that none of them quite knew how to talk about what had happened. Sakura kept glancing at her own hands every few minutes. Sai's ink hawk, still circling faintly overhead, seemed reluctant to fully dissolve back into a scroll, hovering close to the group like it had developed some kind of protective instinct. Sasuke walked with his jaw tight, saying almost nothing the entire trip, clearly still working through his own feelings about carrying an unwilling piece of the strongest-tailed beast in existence. Naruto, meanwhile, spent most of the walk in a quiet, running conversation with Kurama, trying to understand exactly what they were dealing with. "Tell me honestly," Naruto said internally, somewhere around the halfway point of the journey. "Are you actually in danger?" "Like, actually?" "I don't know," Kurama admitted again, and Naruto could feel that the fox genuinely meant it this time, the earlier fury having settled into something more like grim uncertainty. A tailed beast chakra is not meant to exist divided across multiple hosts. I am adapting, because I have no other option, but adaptation is not the same as safety. There may be a cost to this that neither of us understands yet. What kind of cost? If I knew that, Kurama said, I would tell you. This is new territory, brat. For both of us. Can you at least still talk to them? Naruto asked. Sasuke, Sakura, Sai, can you communicate with the pieces now inside them, the way you talk to me? There was a pause, and Naruto felt something shift inside the seal, Kurama reaching outward, almost testing, the way someone might press against a wall to see if it held weight. Faintly, Kurama said slowly. I can feel them. Distantly. Like limbs that have gone numb but haven't gone entirely silent. It's uncomfortable. I am used to being one thing. Now I am stretched across 4 different heartbeats, and every one of them pulls at me slightly differently. Naruto's chest tightened with guilt all over again. I really am sorry. I know, Kurama said. That still does not fix it. They reached Konoha's gates just as the sun was dipping low behind the Hokage monument, and it took approximately 4 seconds after walking through them for Kakashi to appear at their side, having clearly been alerted the moment the gate guards logged their return. You're 12 hours later than scheduled, Kakashi said, and then his visible eye narrowed as he actually looked at them. Really looked, taking in Naruto's still healing wounds, Sakura's unusually pale complexion, Sai's uncharacteristically tense posture, and whatever expression Sasuke was wearing that made even Kakashi's easy demeanor flicker with concern. What happened? It's a long story, Naruto said. We were ambushed, Sakura said more directly. By a mercenary group that was clearly hired specifically to target us. We're all fine. But something happened during the fight that we need to report to Lady Tsunade. Immediately, Kakashi's gaze flicked between the 4 of them, clearly cataloging every small, wrong detail, the faint orange tint still occasionally flickering at the edge of Sakura's fingers when she gestured, the strange stillness in Sai's usually fluid ink constructs, the tightness around Sasuke's eyes that spoke of something more than physical exhaustion. Okay, Kakashi said slowly. Start walking. You can explain on the way. Tsunade's office, 20 minutes later, was not a calm place. The Hokage sat behind her desk with her arms crossed, listening to Naruto's account of the ambush and its aftermath with an expression that shifted, sentence by sentence, from professional concern to something closer to genuine alarm. Shizen stood near the door, notepad in hand, her pen slowing to a stop somewhere around the part where Naruto described the fractured chakra sinking into his teammates' chests. Say that again, Tsunade said, once Naruto finished. Slowly. I fractured pieces of Kurama's chakra, Naruto repeated, and sealed them into Sakura, Sai, and Sasuke. Permanently. It saved their lives. But none of us really know what it means long-term. Tsunade was quiet for a long moment, her sharp gaze sweeping over each of the 3 recipients in turn, as if she could see the fox chakra settled inside them just by looking hard enough. You're telling me, she said finally, that there are now 4 people in this village carrying pieces of the 9 tails. Yes, Naruto said. Tsunade closed her eyes briefly, pressing 2 fingers against her temple in the exact gesture of someone doing rapid, exhausted math on how many new problems this single sentence had just created. Shizen, clear my schedule for tomorrow. All of it. Yes, Lady Tsunade, Shizen said, already scribbling. And get me a Noichi in the medical division on standby for the morning. I want a full examination of all 4 of them before this goes any further, and I want it done quietly. Tsunade's eyes settled on Naruto with an intensity that made him straighten instinctively. Because if word of this gets out before we understand what we're actually dealing with, we are going to have every major village and half the missing nin in the elemental nations trying to figure out exactly how much of a tailed beast just became available to hunt. The weight of that settled over the room like a physical thing. Understood, Naruto said quietly. Tsunade's expression softened, just slightly, as she looked at the 4 exhausted, shaken shinobi standing in front of her. For what it's worth, she said, saving your team's lives wasn't the wrong call. But we need to understand exactly what this means before it becomes something none of us can control. Go home. Rest. Report to the hospital first thing tomorrow morning. All 4 of you. That night, none of them slept particularly well, and if you've ever had a day so strange your own body feels unfamiliar afterward, you know exactly the kind of restlessness we're talking about. Sakura lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, occasionally holding her hand up to watch faint orange light trace along her fingers before fading, over and over, like she was testing whether it had been real. At one point she got up, made herself a cup of tea to settle her nerves, and sat by her window turning the strange new warmth in her chest over in her mind. It didn't feel invasive. It didn't feel wrong, exactly. It just felt like something enormous had quietly moved into a room in her body that she hadn't known was empty. Across the village, Sai sat cross-legged on his floor, ink brush in hand, testing small, careful strokes on blank paper. Each creature he drew, a small bird, a simple fish, a coiled snake, came to life with more vibrancy and independence than anything he'd ever produced before, moving with something that looked disturbingly close to genuine will rather than simple animation. He found it fascinating. He also found it, in a way he didn't quite have the emotional vocabulary to fully articulate yet, a little unsettling. And in the Uchiha compound, in the quiet, mostly empty rooms Sasuke had never fully filled back up since his return to the village, something else entirely was happening. Because the curse seal on Sasuke's neck, the mark Orochimaru had left behind years ago, dormant but never truly gone, had felt the arrival of that fractured fox chakra the moment it settled into Sasuke's system. And it did not like it. Sasuke woke in the middle of the night to a burning sensation spreading from the base of his neck, sharp enough to make him gasp and sit upright in the dark, one hand flying instinctively to the mark. Beneath his fingers, he could feel it, faint, ugly lines spreading further than they should have, pulsing in time with something that wasn't quite his own heartbeat. It's reacting, he thought grimly, gritting his teeth against the pain. Of course it is. He didn't tell anyone that night. He told himself it wasn't serious enough to bother anyone with at 3 a.m, that it would settle by the time he needed to report to the hospital in a few hours. He told himself a lot of things that night, most of them wrong. Morning came, and all 4 of them reported to Konoha General Hospital exactly as instructed, filing into a private examination wing that had been cleared out and secured specifically for this purpose. Tsunade was already there, along with Shizen, Inoichi Yamanaka, and 2 of the hospital's most trusted senior medical nin, all of them wearing the careful, focused expressions of people about to examine something that had never existed before. All right, Tsunade said, addressing all 4 of them at once. We're going to do this systematically. Chakra readings first, then physical examination, then, if you're willing, Inoichi's going to do a light mental scan on each of you, just to check for any psychological bleed-through from the fox's presence. Any objections? None from me, Naruto said immediately. Fine, Sasuke said, though there was something guarded in his tone that Tsunade's sharp eyes caught but didn't press on yet. Understood, Sakura said. Sai simply nodded. The chakra readings came first, and even Tsunade, who had seen more shinobi medical anomalies in her lifetime than almost anyone alive, visibly straightened when the results came back. These aren't residual traces, she murmured, studying the readouts with a frown carving deep lines into her forehead. These are active, sustained chakra signatures, distinct from your own baseline network but fully integrated into it. It's like... She paused, searching for the right comparison. It's like grafting a second root system onto a tree and having it actually take. That's basically what happened, Naruto said. Kurama said it was a fracture. Like he split off pieces of himself and they bonded permanently instead of dissipating. And how is he handling that? Tsunade asked, sharp eyes flicking to Naruto. The fox himself. Is he stable? Naruto hesitated. He says he doesn't know. That nothing like this has ever happened before. That it might be putting strain on him he can't fully predict. Tsunade's frown deepened further, and she exchanged a brief, heavy look with Shizen. That's the part that worries me most, she admitted. We're not just dealing with the effect on 3 new hosts. We're dealing with an unknown effect on the source itself. The physical examinations that followed were extensive: chakra coil mapping, reflex testing, careful checks for any sign of rejection or instability in the new chakra's integration. Sakura's results showed chakra control readings nearly double her baseline, alongside regenerative capacity in soft tissue that made the examining medic actually whistle out loud in surprise. Sai's chakra signatures showed unusual fluctuation tied directly to his ink techniques, consistent with what they'd all witnessed the night before. And Naruto's own readings, notably, showed his baseline chakra reserve sitting measurably lower than his historical averages, evidence that whatever Kurama had given away, it had come from somewhere. You gave up part of your own capacity to do this, Tsunade said quietly, studying Naruto's chart with a troubled expression. This isn't chakra that simply doubled and split off clean. You're weaker for this, Naruto. How much weaker? We won't know until we see how you perform under real strain. Naruto swallowed hard, but nodded. He'd known somewhere that there had to be a cost. Hearing it confirmed still landed heavier than he expected. Then it was Sasuke's turn. The examining medic pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of Sasuke's neck, checking chakra flow near the curse seal as a standard part of his overall assessment, the mark being a known, long-documented anomaly in his medical file that every examination routinely checked. The moment her fingers made contact, Sasuke flinched, hard, a full-body flinch that drew immediate attention from everyone in the room. Sasuke? Sakura's voice sharpened instantly into something more clinical, more alarmed. What was that? Nothing, Sasuke said, too fast, jaw tight. That was not nothing, Tsunade said, already crossing the room, her earlier careful patience evaporating into brisk, focused urgency. Let me see. Sasuke hesitated, just a beat too long, before reluctantly tilting his head to allow access to the mark at the base of his neck. What Tsunade saw made her expression harden immediately. The curse seal, normally dormant and barely visible unless directly activated, was faintly, visibly active, thin dark lines spreading further along his skin than the documented pattern, pulsing with a slow, irregular rhythm that had nothing to do with any technique Sasuke was consciously performing. How long has it been like this? Tsunade demanded. Since last night, Sasuke admitted, and the reluctance in his voice made it clear exactly why he hadn't mentioned it sooner. It's not a big deal. I can manage it. That is not your call to make right now, Tsunade snapped, all business now, gesturing sharply for one of the senior medics. Get me a full chakra scan of that seal, immediately. If Orochimaru's curse mark is reacting to fractured-tailed beast chakra, I want to know exactly how and why before it gets worse. It's fine, Sasuke insisted, though there was a faint sheen of sweat at his hairline now that hadn't been there a moment ago. I've dealt with the seal before. This isn't. He stopped mid-sentence, jaw clenching hard, one hand flying up to grip the side of his neck as a fresh wave of pain visibly crashed through him. Sasuke! Sakura was at his side instantly, medical instincts overriding everything else, hands glowing faintly with her own newly enhanced chakra as she reached for him. I'm fine, Sasuke gritted out, though his knees had gone unsteady beneath him, and the dark lines of the curse seal were spreading further now, faster, crawling visibly across his collarbone in a way none of them had ever seen it move before. Get him onto the examination table, now, Tsunade ordered, all traces of the earlier careful, measured approach gone, replaced by the sharp, focused urgency of someone who had seen exactly how badly this kind of situation could spiral if it wasn't caught in time. Inoichi, I need you to check for any foreign chakra conflict at the seal's activation point. Shizen, prep a suppression seal, immediate application. The room moved fast around Sasuke as he was guided, half walking, half supported by Sakura and one of the medics, onto the nearest examination table, the dark lines of the curse mark now visibly pulsing along his neck and shoulder, reacting violently to something that had settled inside him only a day earlier, and had no business existing anywhere near Orochimaru's old, twisted seal. Talk to me, Tsunade said sharply, leaning over him, her hands already glowing with diagnostic chakra. Sasuke. What does it feel like? Right now, like. Sasuke's breath hitched, his back arching slightly off the table as another wave hit him. Like it's trying to. He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, his entire body went rigid, and a scream tore out of him, sharp, raw, and utterly unlike anything any of them had ever heard from Sasuke Uchiha before. A sound that instantly silenced the entire room and sent Sakura's heart lurching into her throat. Sasuke! She screamed, hands pressing desperately against his shoulders as the cursed seal's dark lines spread further still, now crawling up the side of his neck toward his jaw, pulsing in violent, uneven rhythm against the faint orange glow of fox chakra visibly fighting back beneath his skin. Tsunade's hands moved in a blur, chakra flaring bright gold as she fought to stabilize whatever was happening beneath the surface, shouting orders to the medical staff scrambling around her. Naruto stood frozen for half a second, horror rooted deep in his chest, before Kurama's voice suddenly roared through his mind with an urgency that snapped him instantly back into motion. The seal is trying to consume the fractured chakra, Kurama snarled, sharp and alarmed in a way that made Naruto's blood run cold. If it succeeds, it isn't just going to hurt him, Naruto. It's going to tear him apart from the inside. Tsunade's hands blazed gold with diagnostic chakra as she pressed them flat against Sasuke's chest, her focus narrowing to a razor point, while the rest of the room dissolved into controlled chaos around her. Shizen, the suppression seal, now! She barked. On it! Shizen's brush moved in fast, precise strokes across a specialized paper tag, chakra ink flaring to life the moment the final line was drawn. She slapped it directly against the base of Sasuke's neck, right over the worst of the spreading dark lines. For a moment, nothing changed. Sasuke's back was still arched off the table, another broken sound tearing from his throat as the curse mark and the fox chakra beneath it fought for dominance somewhere in the depths of his own body. It's not enough, Tsunade muttered, sweat beading at her temple as she poured more chakra into the diagnostic pulse, trying to map exactly what was happening beneath the surface. The seal isn't reacting to a simple foreign chakra intrusion. It's trying to feed on it. Actively. Feed on it? Sakura's voice was tight with barely controlled panic, her glowing hands pressed against Sasuke's shoulder, trying uselessly to soothe pain she didn't yet know how to treat. You mean Orochimaru's seal is trying to absorb Kurama's chakra? That's exactly what I mean, Tsunade said grimly. And it's losing. Which means it's dragging on Sasuke's own chakra network trying to compensate. Naruto stood frozen near the door, hands clenched into fists, Kurama's voice a constant, urgent pressure inside his skull. Naruto, Kurama said, sharp and fast. I can push back against it. From my end. But I need you to open the connection wider. Let more of what's left flow toward him, enough to overwhelm whatever the seal is trying to pull. That'll weaken you both, Naruto said out loud without thinking, and every head in the room turned toward him. Naruto, Tsunade snapped. What is he telling you? He says he can push back against the seal from inside Sasuke, Naruto said quickly. But it means sending more chakra through the connection between us all. It'll drain me more. Maybe drain him too. Tsunade's eyes were hard, calculating, weighing an equation with no good answers. Will it stabilize him? He thinks so. Then do it, Tsunade said. We don't have time for a better option. Naruto closed his eyes, and inside the seal, felt Kurama surge forward with a focus and intensity he'd rarely felt from the fox before, not the wild, destructive fury of their earliest days together, but something more like a physician's precision, careful and deliberate even under pressure. Hold still, brat, Kurama muttered, mostly to himself. This needs to be exact. A fresh pulse of red-orange chakra flared out from Naruto's chest, thinner and more controlled than the desperate burst on the road 2 nights earlier, threading directly towards Sasuke like a single, focused beam rather than a scattered explosion. It sank into him, and for a moment the dark lines of the curse mark writhed violently, fighting against the intrusion, and then, gradually, began to recede. Sasuke's back hit the table. His breathing, ragged and uneven a moment before, slowly began to even out. The screaming stopped. The room, which had been a storm of motion and shouted orders only seconds earlier, went suddenly, exhaustedly quiet. Is it over? Sakura asked, voice barely above a whisper, hands still glowing faintly against Sasuke's shoulder. Tsunade kept her palms pressed against his chest a moment longer, reading the last of the diagnostic pulse, before finally exhaling and letting her hands drop. For now, she said, the seal's gone dormant again. But that was not a permanent fix. That was a patch. Sasuke's eyes fluttered open, dazed and exhausted, focusing slowly on the ceiling before flicking toward Sakura, then Tsunade, then Naruto. That, he said, voice rough, was not fun. You scared the life out of all of us, Sakura said, half a scold and half something much softer, relief bleeding through every word. Noted, Sasuke muttered, letting his head fall back against the table. Try not to do that again. I'll take it under advisement, he said dryly, and despite everything, Naruto found himself laughing, short, exhausted, but real. Once Sasuke was stable and resting under close observation, Tsunade called the rest of the team into her office for a conversation that was, by necessity, a lot more serious than any of them wanted it to be. Here's where we stand, she said, arms crossed, standing behind her desk with the weight of a Hokage who just watched one of her shinobi nearly torn apart by a chakra conflict nobody in the village had a name for yet. The fractured chakra inside Sasuke is directly antagonizing the cursed seal Orochimaru left behind. That means Sasuke, specifically, is carrying a risk none of the rest of you are. Sakura, sigh, your integration seems stable so far. Sasuke's isn't, not fully, not yet. So what do we do? Sakura asked. We manage it, Tsunade said. Starting with training, controlled, supervised, and slow. All four of you need to learn how this new chakra actually behaves before any of you use it in the field again. That includes Sasuke learning to keep the seal from destabilizing every time his emotions spike, which, given his general disposition, she raised an eyebrow pointedly, is going to be a challenge. I heard that, Sasuke said flatly from where he sat, still recovering, arms crossed despite the exhaustion clearly written across his face. You were meant to, Tsunade said unbothered. Kakashi, Jiraiya, I want the two of you running this training personally. Quietly. I don't want word of any of this reaching the council before we have a better handle on what we're actually managing. Kakashi, who had been standing near the window through most of the conversation, nodded once. Understood. And Naruto. Tsunade's gaze settled on him, sharper now, more pointed. You gave away pieces of your own chakra to make this happen. Your reserves are measurably lower than your baseline. That's going to affect your own performance until we understand whether this is a permanent reduction or something your body can eventually compensate for. You're not exempt from this training. If anything, you need it more than anyone, because right now, you are the weakest link in your own team, and that's not a sentence I ever expected to say about you. Naruto's jaw tightened, but he nodded. It stung to hear, but it wasn't wrong. All right, Tsunade said, straightening. Get some rest, all of you. Training starts tomorrow, at the old training grounds past the eastern wall, secluded, secure, and far enough from prying eyes that we can figure this out without half the village watching. The next morning, Team 7 gathered at Training Ground 44's outer edge, not deep enough into the forest of death to be genuinely dangerous, but isolated enough that Kakashi and Jiraiya could work with them without an audience. Jiraiya arrived a few minutes late, as always, though the easy, joking demeanor he usually carried was noticeably absent. All right, brats, he said, looking over the four of them with an assessing eye. Kakashi filled me in on the broad strokes. Let's talk specifics. Naruto, you first. How are your reserves feeling? Lower, Naruto admitted. Like there's a permanent chunk missing that used to be there. I can still access Kurama's chakra when I need to, but it feels thinner somehow. Harder to hold on to for as long as I used to. Jiraiya nodded slowly. That tracks. You gave away real capacity, not just a temporary loan. We're going to need to rebuild your control from a lower baseline, which means relearning some fundamentals you probably haven't thought about since you were a genin. Naruto grimaced, but didn't argue. Sakura. Jiraiya turned to her. Show me what you can do. Nothing complicated, just a basic chakra scalpel. Controlled output. Sakura nodded, focusing inward, drawing on the new warmth she'd felt building in her chest since the fracture. Her palm glowed with the familiar green of medical chakra, but threaded through it, faint and unmistakable, was a warm orange undertone that hadn't been there before. Interesting, Jiraiya murmured, leaning in for a closer look. The two chakras aren't fighting each other. They're blending. That's actually a good sign. Suggests your body's accepting the integration naturally rather than treating it as an intrusion. It doesn't feel like an intrusion, Sakura said quietly. It feels like it's always been there. Like I just didn't have access to it until now. Good, Jiraiya said. That's the ideal outcome. Sai, you're next. Sai produced a small ink bird on a scrap of paper, watching as it lifted off the page with more independent motion than his creations had ever displayed before, circling once around his head before settling back onto his shoulder. It listens less, Sai observed clinically. Or perhaps, it listens differently. It requires less direct instruction to act with intent. You're going to need to relearn the boundary between guiding these things and letting them act on their own initiative, Jiraiya said. Could be an asset in combat if you can control it. Could also be a serious liability if you can't. Understood, Sai said in the tone of someone filing away a new technical problem to solve, rather than someone unsettled by it. Though Naruto, watching closely, thought he caught the faintest flicker of genuine unease beneath the composed exterior. And then there was Sasuke. All right, Jiraiya said, turning to him with a noticeably more careful expression than he'd used with the others. Kakashi told me what happened yesterday. I want you to try something small, just a light chakra flare. Nothing aggressive. Sasuke's jaw tightened, but he nodded, closing his eyes and drawing on the faintest thread of the new chakra settled inside him. For a moment it worked fine, a faint orange glow tracing along his fingers, steady and controlled. Then, as his focus sharpened, a flicker of old frustration surfaced, leftover tension from yesterday's ordeal, from years of carrying more weight than he ever talked about, and the dark lines of the curse seal stirred faintly at the base of his neck in response. Stop, Kakashi said immediately, stepping forward. Sasuke. Pull back. Now. Sasuke's eyes snapped open, and he cut the chakra flow instantly, breathing hard, the dark lines settling back into stillness after a tense few seconds. That happens every time, he admitted quietly, once he'd caught his breath. Any strong emotion. Any spike in focus. It's like the seal's watching for an opening. Then that's exactly what we're going to work on, Kakashi said, crouching down to Sasuke's eye level with the calm, steady patience he'd shown Sasuke since he was 12 years old. Emotional regulation under chakra strain. It's not glamorous. It's not going to feel like real training half the time, but it's the only way to make sure this doesn't happen again in the middle of an actual fight. Sasuke exhaled slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders easing at the quiet reassurance in Kakashi's voice. Fine. The days that followed fell into a grueling but methodical rhythm. Naruto spent hours relearning chakra control exercises he hadn't touched seriously since his early genin days. Leaf balancing drills, water walking refinement, careful, incremental chakra output exercises designed to help him find the true edges of his diminished reserves. It was humbling, in a way that stung more than he expected. He'd grown used to being the one with limitless stamina, the one who could always dig deeper when everyone else ran dry. Relearning his own limits felt like losing a piece of his identity, even if he understood exactly why it mattered. You're not as weak as you think, Kurama told him, somewhere around the third day, as Naruto sat cross-legged in the grass after a particularly frustrating drill, breathing hard from exertion that shouldn't have tired him out this quickly. You're recalibrating. That's different from being weak. Feels the same from where I'm sitting, Naruto muttered. It won't forever, Kurama said. Give it time. Sakura's training took a different shape entirely. Less about learning control from scratch and more about learning restraint. Her enhanced strength, paired with her medical precision, made her dangerously capable in ways she hadn't anticipated. During a sparring exercise meant to test her reflexes, she cracked a training log clean in half with a strike she'd meant as a light tap, sending splinters flying and drawing a startled curse from Kakashi, who'd been standing closer than he probably should have. Sorry, Sakura said immediately, mortified, hands flying to her mouth. I didn't mean to put that much into it, I swear. No, that's actually useful information, Kakashi said, brushing a splinter off his flak jacket with admirable composure. You're stronger than you think you are right now. We just need to teach you to modulate that the same way you'd modulate any other jutsu's output. Sai's training focused heavily on the strange new independence of his ink creations, working with Jiraiya to establish clearer boundaries of control without stripping away the useful vitality the fractured chakra had given them. It was slow, careful work, Sai testing small creatures, watching how far they'd act on their own before he reined them back in, gradually mapping the edges of a new relationship between artist and creation that had never existed in quite this way before. It's fascinating, Sai admitted to Naruto one evening, as they walked back from the training grounds together, ink-stained fingers flexing idly at his side. I've spent so long trying to understand emotional connection through observation and study. Now I have creations that seem to possess something like intention of their own. I find myself wondering if this is what having a real bond feels like. Careful, Naruto said, grinning despite the exhaustion of the day. You're starting to sound almost sentimental, am I? Sai considered this seriously. I'll have to note that down. Naruto laughed, and even Sai's mouth curved into something that looked almost like a genuine smile. Sasuke's training was, by far, the hardest. Kakashi worked with him one-on-one for hours at a time, focusing not on chakra output but on the quieter, harder work of emotional regulation, teaching Sasuke to notice the earliest flickers of frustration or anger before they built into anything the seal could latch onto, and to consciously, deliberately release that tension before it spiraled. It was slow going. Sasuke had spent years building walls around exactly the kind of emotional volatility that now threatened to destabilize him from the inside, and unlearning the instinct to bury frustration instead of processing it wasn't something that happened overnight. You're doing the thing again, Kakashi said, on their fourth day of training, watching the faint dark lines stir at the base of Sasuke's neck during a sparring exercise that had gotten a little too intense. I'm fine, Sasuke said through gritted teeth, pulling back from the exchange, forcing his breathing to slow. You're not, Kakashi said, not unkindly. And that's all right. This isn't the kind of thing you fix by insisting you're fine. Talk to me. What set it off right there? Sasuke was quiet for a long moment, jaw working, clearly debating whether to actually answer honestly or deflect the way he usually did. I don't like feeling like the liability, he admitted finally, quietly, the admission clearly costing him something. Naruto gave up part of himself to save my life, and instead of being grateful, all I've done since is nearly get torn apart by my own seal and slow the team down. Kakashi's expression softened. Sasuke. Nobody on this team sees you as a liability. I see myself as one, Sasuke said, sharper than he meant to, and the dark lines at his neck flickered again in response before he forced them back down with visible effort. Kakashi studied him for a long moment, choosing his next words carefully. You've spent most of your life believing that your worth is tied to how much strength you can produce on your own. That's part of why the seal Orochimaru gave you took root as easily as it did in the first place. It offered you power without needing anyone else's help. But this, he gestured vaguely at the faint orange glow still lingering at Sasuke's fingertips. This only exists because Naruto trusted you enough to give up part of himself to keep you alive. That's not a weakness being forced on you. That's someone believing you're worth saving. Sasuke didn't answer right away, staring down at his own hands, the orange glow slowly fading back into stillness as his breathing steadied. I'll work on it, he said finally quietly. That's all I'm asking, Kakashi said. By the end of the first week, real progress had been made, even if none of them would have called it comfortable progress. Naruto's control over his diminished reserves had sharpened considerably, allowing him to stretch what remained further than he'd initially thought possible. Sakura had learned to modulate her enhanced strength with far greater precision, able to shift fluidly between gentle medical work and devastating physical force depending on what a situation demanded. Sai's ink creations, while still more independent than before, responded to his direction with far greater reliability, the initial unpredictability smoothing into something he could actually rely on in a real fight. And Sasuke, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, had begun learning to catch the earliest flickers of the seal's activation before they could build into anything dangerous, pulling himself back from the edge through sheer, deliberate effort rather than avoiding emotional strain altogether. You're all improving faster than I expected, Kakashi admitted, watching the four of them run through a coordinated sparring exercise on the seventh evening of training, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the training ground. Given the circumstances. Doesn't mean it's not exhausting, Sakura said, wiping sweat from her forehead as she caught her breath. Progress usually is, Jiraiya said, watching the group with an assessing eye of his own. But there's something else I want to test, now that the basics are solid. Naruto, get the others together. I want to see what happens when all four of you actually fight in coordination, drawing on the shared chakra at the same time. Naruto blinked. Together? Like all at once? That's the idea, Jiraiya said. You four are the first people in history carrying pieces of the same tailed beast simultaneously. I want to know if that connection does anything more than just give each of you individual power. I want to know if it does something when you fight as a unit. The four of them exchanged glances, Sakura curious, Sai intrigued, Sasuke guarded but willing, and Naruto, feeling something stir faintly in his chest that he couldn't quite name, somewhere between anticipation and nerves. What do you think? He asked Kurama silently. Is this a good idea? Kurama was quiet for a moment, and when the fox finally answered, there was something almost thoughtful in the response, a curiosity Naruto hadn't expected. Honestly, brat, Kurama said, I have no idea. But I suppose there's only one way to find out. They lined up across from each other at Jiraiya's direction, Naruto, Sakura, Sasuke, and Sai, standing roughly 10 feet apart, facing a cluster of training dummies set up at the far end of the clearing. All right, Jiraiya called out. On my mark, all four of you draw on the shared chakra at the same time and hit those targets together. Don't overthink the coordination, just focus on your own output and see what happens. Naruto closed his eyes, feeling for the familiar warmth of Kurama's chakra, and beside him, sensed, faintly, strangely, the others doing the same, each of them reaching for something that had, until recently, belonged only to him. Now! Jiraiya called. 4 surges of orange-red chakra flared to life simultaneously, and for a fraction of a second, something extraordinary happened. The 4 separate chakra signatures didn't just coexist in the same space. They reached toward each other, threads of energy arcing faintly between the 4 of them like sparks jumping a gap. And for one dizzying instant, Naruto felt something he never felt before, a sense of the others, not just as teammates standing beside him, but as extensions of something shared, present in a way that went beyond simple proximity. The combined strike that followed hit the training dummies with a force that obliterated all 3 of them instantly, sending splinters of wood flying across the clearing in a violent, overwhelming burst that left Jiraiya's eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. The chakra faded as quickly as it had come, and all 4 of them stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other with matching expressions of stunned disbelief. Did you guys feel that? Sakura asked, breathless. Yeah, Sasuke said, staring down at his own hands. That wasn't just 4 separate attacks. It felt like one, Sai said quietly. Like we were all reaching for the same thing at the same moment. Naruto's heart was pounding, and inside him, Kurama's presence felt different too, not weaker, not more strained, but somehow more settled, as if the fox had just discovered something about its own fractured existence that it hadn't expected. Interesting, Kurama murmured, and there was something almost like wonder buried beneath the characteristic gruffness. It seems dividing myself among the 4 of you didn't just create 4 separate fragments. It created something that still recognizes itself, across all of you, when you reach for it together. What does that mean? Naruto asked out loud, and Jiraiya, catching only half the context, leaned forward with obvious interest. It means, Jiraiya said slowly, studying the scorched, splintered wreckage of the training dummies with a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face, that you 4 might have just stumbled onto something no shinobi in history has ever had access to before. A genuine resonance between hosts of the same tailed beast. The clearing went quiet, the weight of that realization settling over all 4 of them. That's either the best news we've had all week, Sasuke said finally, or the reason every enemy village is about to want us dead even more than they already do. Jiraiya's smile didn't fade. Knowing our luck, he said, probably both. It started, as these things so often do, with someone who wasn't supposed to be watching in the first place. A groundskeeper assigned to the outer training fields near the eastern wall had noticed the unusual activity almost a week earlier, 4 young shinobi training at odd hours, accompanied by 2 jonin, in a section of the grounds that had been quietly cordoned off under vague official pretenses. Curiosity, as it tends to do, got the better of him. On the evening of the resonance breakthrough, he'd been close enough to the tree line to witness the combined chakra strike that obliterated 3 training dummies in a single, blinding burst of orange-red light. He didn't understand what he'd seen, but he understood enough to know it was strange, and strange things, in a shinobi village recovering from as much conflict as Konoha had weathered in recent years, had a way of making people talk. By the next morning, the story had already begun its slow crawl through the village grapevine, distorted, exaggerated, passed from a market stall owner to a genin's parent to a member of the civilian council's household staff, until by the time it reached anyone with actual political weight, it had transformed into something considerably more alarming than the truth. 4 Jinchuriki in the village. That was the phrase that stuck, the one that spread fastest, the one that made its way into a formal request for an emergency council session less than 48 hours after Jiraiya's training exercise. Tsunade received the summons with the particular flavor of exhaustion reserved for problems she'd been actively trying to prevent. Emergency session, she read aloud from the scroll Shizen had just handed her, pinching the bridge of her nose. Requested by 3 members of the Civilian Council and seconded by 2 clan representatives. Subject: reports of multiple unauthorized Jinchuriki within village limits. It's worse than we hoped, Shizen said quietly. Someone talked. Or someone saw something they shouldn't have. Doesn't matter which at this point, Tsunade said, setting the scroll down with more force than necessary. What matters is damage control. Get me Kakashi and Jiraiya. And get Team 7. If this is happening today, I want them prepared before they walk into that room. Naruto had never been particularly fond of council sessions, mostly because the handful he'd attended over the years had involved being talked about like he wasn't standing right there in the room. This one, he suspected, was going to be worse. They're going to ask about Kurama, he said, pacing back and forth in the small antechamber outside the council hall while Sakura, Sasuke, and Sai waited with varying degrees of visible tension. They're going to make it sound like something dangerous happened instead of something that saved your lives. Because from a certain angle, Sasuke said, arms crossed, it kind of is something dangerous. We don't actually know the long-term effects on any of us. Least of all me. That's not the same as it being a threat, Sakura said firmly. Try telling that to a room full of people who've spent their entire lives afraid of what happened when the fox got loose in the village decades ago, Sasuke said. They're not going to hear life-saving act of desperation. They're going to hear 4 uncontrolled weapons walking around with civilians. Sai, who had been quietly observing the exchange, tilted his head. Is that an inaccurate assessment? It's an incomplete one, Naruto said, a little more sharply than he meant to. We're not weapons. We're people who got put in an impossible situation. I know that, Sai said mildly. I'm simply noting that the council may not draw the same distinction. Before anyone could respond, the doors to the council chamber swung open, and Shizen stepped through, her expression carefully neutral in the way it always was right before something difficult. They're ready for you, she said. All of you. Lady Tsunade wants you standing together when you go in. The council chamber was arranged the way it always was for formal sessions, Tsunade seated at the head of a long, curved table, with the clan representatives arrayed along one side and the civilian council members along the other. A deliberate visual balance the previous Hokage had insisted upon generations ago. Kakashi and Jiraiya stood near the wall behind Team 7 as they filed in, a quiet, deliberate show of support that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. Naruto scanned the table quickly. Hayashi Hyuga sat with his usual unreadable composure, hands folded, sharp eyes already assessing all 4 of them with clinical precision. Shikaku Nara sat a few seats down, looking, as always, faintly bored in a way that Naruto knew from experience meant he was paying closer attention than anyone else in the room. And near the far end, the civilian council members, 3 older men and 1 woman, all dressed in the plain, formal dark robes typical of council sessions, wore expressions ranging from cautious concern to outright suspicion. Danzo's seat, notably, sat empty, though Naruto had the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that whatever happened in this room would find its way to him regardless. Let's begin, Tsunade said, her voice carrying the weight of someone determined to control the narrative before it spiraled further. I understand there are concerns regarding recent developments involving Team 7. I'd like to address them directly and clearly, so I'll ask that everyone hold questions until I've laid out the full situation. With respect, Lady Tsunade, one of the civilian council members said, an older man named Fumio, whose family had sat on the council for 3 generations. We've heard reports that there are now 4 Jinchuriki walking freely through this village, unsupervised and untested. Given our history with the 9 Tails, I think you understand why that report alone is enough to warrant immediate concern. That report, Tsunade said evenly, is inaccurate in its framing, though not entirely wrong in its facts. Let me clarify what actually happened. She laid it out plainly. The ambush, the poisoning, Naruto's desperate act to save his teammates, The permanent but not uncontrolled nature of the fractured chakra now settled within Sakura, Sai, and Sasuke. She was careful, deliberate, choosing her words to emphasize the circumstances without minimizing the genuine strangeness of what had happened. When she finished, the silence in the room stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. So to be clear, Fumio said finally, you're confirming that 3 additional shinobi in this village are now carrying fragments of the Nine-Tails chakra. Permanently. With no established precedent for what that means long-term. That is correct, Tsunade said. And you allowed this to continue for over a week without informing this council, said the woman beside him, Councilwoman Rin, her tone sharp with the particular offense of someone who felt deliberately excluded from something they believed they had a right to know. I was managing an unprecedented medical and tactical situation while trying to prevent exactly the kind of panic this session risks creating, Tsunade said, an edge creeping into her voice now. I made the judgment that stabilizing the situation quietly, before bringing it to a room full of people who might react exactly the way this room is currently reacting, was the responsible course of action. With all due respect, Hokage, Hayashi Hyuga said, speaking for the first time, his voice measured and calm in a way that somehow felt more unsettling than the civilian council's open alarm. The concern here isn't purely political. It's a matter of village security. 3 additional individuals now carry a portion of a tailed beast's power inside them. If even one of those individuals were to be captured by a hostile force, or if the chakra itself were to destabilize under stress, the consequences could extend well beyond Team 7. Naruto felt his jaw tighten, but he held his tongue, watching Tsunade carefully. Those are valid concerns, Tsunade said, which is exactly why I've had them under close medical supervision and controlled training since the incident occurred. We are not treating this casually, and yet here we are, Fumio said, learning about it secondhand through village rumor, rather than through any formal notification, because I was giving my medical staff time to determine whether these 4 shinobi were even stable enough to be discussed without causing exactly the kind of alarm currently filling this room. Tsunade shot back, patience visibly thinning. The tension in the room climbed steadily, voices rising in overlapping concern and frustration, until Shikaku Nara, who had said nothing through the entire exchange, finally spoke, his tone as unbothered as ever, cutting cleanly through the noise. Can we see it? Every head turned toward him. See what, exactly? Tsunade asked. Whatever it is they can do now, Shikaku said, gesturing vaguely toward the 4 of them standing at attention near the front of the room. We're arguing in circles about hypothetical risk. I'd rather see a demonstration and judge for myself whether this is something to fear or something to be genuinely proud of. Seems like the most efficient way to settle this. A murmur ran through the council at the suggestion, and Tsunade's eyes flicked briefly to Naruto, a silent question passing between them. Naruto straightened, meeting her gaze. He understood immediately what she was asking, and more importantly, what was actually at stake here, not just for the 4 of them, but for how the entire village would perceive this going forward. We can do that, Naruto said, stepping forward slightly. If it'll help. Tsunade held his gaze a moment longer, then gave a small, approving nod. All right. Let's take this outside. The council reconvened in the open courtyard behind the Hokage building a short while later. The clan representatives and civilian council members arranged along the perimeter while Team 7 stood in the open center, Kakashi and Jiraiya positioned nearby, alert and ready to intervene if anything went wrong. Something controlled, Tsunade said quietly, addressing Naruto specifically. Something that demonstrates restraint, not just raw power. That's what will actually calm this room down. Naruto understood the assignment immediately, and it chafed a little, if he was honest. The idea that he had to deliberately underperform, hold back the full weight of what they'd discovered in training, just to make a room full of nervous adults feel safe. Part of him wanted to show them exactly what the resonance could do, to prove that this wasn't some uncontrolled threat but something extraordinary. But he caught Tsunade's eye again, and understood, with the particular clarity that came from years of watching how the village treated things it didn't understand, that restraint was exactly what this moment called for. All right, he said, turning to the others. Let's keep it simple. Controlled. Show them we know what we're doing. Sasuke's jaw tightened slightly, clearly reading the same subtext Naruto had, the quiet demand to make themselves smaller, safer, less alarming than what they actually were. But he nodded anyway. The demonstration that followed was, by design, almost aggressively unremarkable. Naruto drew on a thin, careful thread of Kurama's chakra, forming a small, contained sphere of orange-tinted energy that hovered steadily above his palm without so much as a flicker of instability. Sakura demonstrated her enhanced healing on a minor scrape. Kakashi volunteered for the purpose, her chakra glowing a soft, controlled green-orange, as the wound closed cleanly within seconds. Sai produced a small ink bird that circled once, gently, before dissolving back into the page exactly as instructed, no trace of the wilder independence they'd observed in training. And Sasuke, with visible effort, activated the faintest trace of the fox chakra along his fingertips, holding it steady for several seconds without the curse seal so much as stirring. It was, deliberately, nothing like what they'd actually accomplished together on the training grounds. And that restraint, that visible, careful control, did exactly what Tsunade had hoped it would. The tension in the courtyard eased, just slightly. Several of the council members exchanged glances that had shifted from alarm to something more like cautious reassessment. Even Fumio's expression had softened marginally by the time the demonstration concluded. That's considerably more controlled than the report suggested, Councilwoman Ren admitted, some of the earlier sharpness gone from her voice. Because the reports were based on rumor, not fact, Tsunade said. As I said? Hayashi studied the four of them for a long moment, his expression unreadable as ever, before finally speaking. I'll admit, this is more measured than I expected. I remain concerned about the long-term implications. But I'm willing to accept continued monitoring rather than more drastic intervention, provided the Hokage maintains close oversight. That was always the plan, Tsunade said. Shikaku, watching the whole exchange with his usual half-lidded, deceptively lazy attention, gave a small nod of his own. Reasonable enough for me. Though I'd suggest keeping this contained for now. The fewer people who know the full extent of what they can do, the better, for their sake as much as the villages. Agreed, Tsunade said. But not everyone in that courtyard shared the same read on the situation. Naruto caught it almost by accident. A flicker of movement near the far edge of the courtyard. A figure standing just at the boundary of the gathered council, close enough to observe but distant enough to remain formally uninvolved. He recognized the uniform before he recognized the face. A rude operative, expression carefully blank, watching the entire demonstration with an intensity that had nothing to do with reassurance. Naruto's stomach tightened. He didn't need to see who the report would eventually reach to understand exactly whose interest this had just attracted. He said nothing in the moment, not wanting to disrupt the fragile calm the demonstration had bought them, but he made a note to mention it to Kakashi the first chance he got. That chance came later that evening, as the team walked back from the Hokage building together, the tension of the day finally starting to ease from their shoulders. There was a root operative watching the whole demonstration, Naruto said quietly, once they were far enough from the main village square to speak freely. Standing at the edge of the courtyard. I don't think anyone else noticed. Kakashi's expression shifted, the easy calm he usually carried sharpening into something more focused. I noticed, he admitted. I was hoping I was wrong about it. You think Danzo already knows? Sakura asked, worry creasing her brow. I think, Kakashi said carefully, that Danzo makes it his business to know things long before anyone tells him officially. If Root had eyes on that courtyard, then yes, he almost certainly already has a full account of what happened, possibly a more detailed one than what we chose to show the council. That's not exactly comforting, Sasuke muttered. No, Kakashi agreed. It isn't. But there's not much we can do about it beyond staying cautious. Danzo's operated in the shadows of this village for decades. He's not going to make a move that's easy to see coming. They walked in silence for a while after that, the weight of the day settling more heavily now that the immediate crisis of the council session had passed. Eventually, they stopped at a small tea house near the edge of the market district, more out of a collective, unspoken need to decompress than any real appetite. Naruto ordered a pot of green tea for the table, along with a plate of grilled chicken skewers, and for a few minutes, the four of them sat together in something close to comfortable quiet, the kind that came from having survived something difficult side by side. You know, Sakura said eventually, turning her cup slowly between her hands, for a minute back there, I actually thought they might try to lock us up. Or worse. They still might, Sasuke said, though without real heat, more resigned observation than fresh alarm. Today just bought us time. Not safety. I know, Naruto said quietly. But time's something, right? We can use it. Use it for what? Sai asked, tilting his head. Naruto considered the question for a moment, looking around at his team. Sakura, still a little pale from the stress of the day but steady. Sai, quiet and thoughtful as ever. Sasuke, guarded but present, sitting with them instead of holding himself apart the way he so often used to. To get stronger, Naruto said finally. Together. So that whatever comes next, Danzo, the council, whoever else decides to have opinions about this, we're ready for it. All four of us. Sasuke huffed out something that might have been a laugh. Optimistic, as always. Somebody's gotta be, Naruto said, grinning despite the exhaustion of the day. Later that night, in a quiet, windowless room deep within Root's hidden headquarters, a different kind of report was being delivered. The demonstration was controlled, the operative said, kneeling before a figure seated in shadow, the only visible light coming from a single lantern set low against the floor. Deliberately restrained, in my assessment. Whatever they actually achieved during training, they showed the council considerably less. Danzo's single visible eye narrowed slightly, the rest of his face obscured by bandages and shadow. And the training itself. What do we know? Limited details so far, the operative admitted. But the groundskeeper's account, combined with what we observed today, suggests a genuine resonance effect between the four hosts. Combined output significantly exceeding the sum of individual contributions. Danzo was quiet for a long moment, considering this, his expression unreadable in the low light. For hosts, he said finally, more to himself than to the operative kneeling before him. Carrying a fractured but genuine connection to the strongest of the tailed beasts. An asset the Hokage seems determined to treat as a liability to be managed rather than a resource to be developed. Should I continue monitoring, sir? Discreetly, Danzo said. I want to understand the full extent of what they're capable of before anyone else in this village does, and I want to know the moment anyone outside Konoha's walls begins showing similar interest. The operative bowed and slipped silently from the room, leaving Danzo alone with his thoughts, the lantern flickering low against the walls, because someone outside Konoha's walls already had. 3 days later, a sealed letter arrived at the Hokage's office, delivered by a Suna courier under the careful, deliberate discretion typically reserved for messages either village wanted intercepted. Tsunade broke the seal herself, reading through the contents with a steadily deepening frown. Shizen, she said quietly, once she'd finished. Get me Kakashi. Now. What is it? Shizen asked, alarmed by the shift in Tsunade's expression. Tsunade set the letter down on her desk, her jaw tight. A contact within Suna's intelligence network intercepted communications suggesting Akatsuki has learned something they shouldn't have. About Team 7? About Kurama, Tsunade said grimly. According to this, Akatsuki already knows the Nine Tails isn't whole anymore. That it's fractured. Divided among 4 separate hosts instead of 1. The color drained slightly from Shizen's face. How? We barely managed to keep this contained within our own council. I don't know, Tsunade admitted, standing and moving to the window, staring out over the village with a troubled, distant expression. But if Akatsuki knows Kurama's chakra is divided, that changes everything about how they're going to approach extraction. It might make it harder to pull the fox back into a single vessel the way they originally intended. Or, Shizen said slowly, dread creeping into her voice, it might just mean they need to capture 4 people now instead of 1. Tsunade said nothing for a long moment, watching the lights of the village flicker on one by one as the evening settled in, thinking of 4 young shinobi who had, until recently, believed the worst of their problems was a council meeting. Get Kakashi, she said finally, quiet and grim. And prepare a full briefing for Team 7. First thing tomorrow morning. They need to know exactly what they're up against now. Far from Konoha, in a hidden base carved into the rock somewhere along a stretch of contested border territory, a meeting was taking place that would have made Tsunade's blood run cold if she'd known the details. The room was dim, lit by a scattering of pale lanterns, 6 cloaked figures with distinctive red-clouded robes arranged loosely around a central chamber. At the head of the gathering stood a man with rippling violet eyes and a face marked by an unnerving array of piercings, his presence commanding absolute stillness from everyone around him without a single raised word. The report has been confirmed through 2 independent sources, Conan said, standing beside him, her voice level and precise. The Nine Tails is no longer whole. Its chakra has been fractured and sealed into 3 additional hosts within Konoha, alongside the original Jinchuriki. A murmur rippled through the gathered members, not quite surprise, since surprise wasn't an emotion this particular organization indulged in often, but something closer to recalculation. That changes the shape of the extraction considerably, said one of the cloaked figures, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity beneath its usual detached cruelty. If the beast is divided, pulling it back into a single vessel may prove considerably more complicated than our original models accounted for. Or considerably simpler, Payne said, his voice quiet but absolute, cutting through the growing murmur with the kind of certainty that ended debate before it truly began. A fractured beast is a beast spread thin across 4 vulnerable points instead of 1 well-guarded Jinchuriki. 4 targets, each individually weaker than the whole, each capable of being isolated and captured with the right approach. 4 targets also means 4 separate captures, Conan said. Each one alerting Konoha's defenses the moment it's attempted. The original plan assumed a single, contained operation. This assumes something considerably more elaborate. Then we adjust, Payne said simply. We are not constrained by the shape of a single plan. We are constrained only by the goal itself. A fractured Ninetales does not change what we ultimately require. It only changes the path we take to acquire it. The debate continued for some time after that, weighing strategies, discussing timelines, arguing over whether it would prove more efficient to capture all 4 hosts simultaneously in a single coordinated strike, or to isolate them one at a time, picking off the weaker links before Konoha could adapt its defenses. There's another consideration, Conan said eventually, once the sharper points of disagreement had settled. If the fractured chakra maintains any connection to itself across the 4 hosts, any resonance, any shared awareness, extracting even one piece may destabilize the others in ways we cannot fully predict. We would be operating in territory no one has attempted before. Then we send someone to observe first, Payne said. Before any extraction attempt is made, I want confirmation of exactly what we're dealing with. The identities of all 4 hosts. Their relative strength. Any weakness in their defenses. His gaze shifted, settling on a figure near the back of the chamber, mostly obscured in shadow, its form an unsettling patchwork of black and white. Zetsu, Payne said. You'll scout Konoha. Quietly. I want full confirmation before we commit to anything further. The white half of the figure's face split into something like an eager smile. The black half simply nodded, cold and silent. It would be my pleasure, the white half said. Back in Konoha, the morning briefing Tsunade had promised arrived with considerably more weight than any conversation Team 7 had had with her before. Sit down, Tsunade said once the 4 of them had filed into her office alongside Kakashi and Jiraiya. Her tone left no room for anything but full attention. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until I say otherwise. She laid it out plainly, the intercepted intelligence from Suna's contacts, the confirmation that Akatsuki already knew Kurama's chakra had been fractured, and the near certainty that the organization was now reassessing its entire extraction strategy around that new reality. The color drained slowly from Sakura's face as she listened. Sai's expression remained carefully neutral, though his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the edge of his sketchbook. Sasuke's jaw set into a hard, familiar line, the look of someone already running through worst-case scenarios. And Naruto sat very still, feeling the weight of Kurama's presence inside him shift with something that felt uncomfortably close to alarm. They know, Kurama said quietly, once Tsunade finished speaking. Of course they know. I should have expected this faster than I did. How bad is this, really? Naruto asked out loud, and Tsunade's sharp eyes settled on him immediately, understanding exactly who he was actually asking. Kurama says it's bad, Naruto clarified. That we should have expected them to find out this fast. It is bad, Tsunade said grimly, not bothering to soften it. Akatsuki has been hunting Jinchuriki systematically for years, and they've never had to work around a fractured target before. That uncertainty could work in our favor, or it could make them considerably more aggressive in probing your defenses to understand exactly what they're dealing with. So what do we do? Sakura asked, her voice steadier than her expression. We prepare, Tsunade said. I'm authorizing increased security around all 4 of you, effective immediately. Discreet, but real. And I want your training accelerated, not just individual control, but genuine combat readiness as a unit. If Akatsuki decides to test the waters, I want you ready for it. And if they don't just test the waters? Sasuke asked. If they come at us directly? Tsunade's expression didn't waver, though something grim settled behind her eyes. Then you'll need every advantage that resonance of yours can give you, because Akatsuki doesn't send anyone who isn't dangerous enough to warrant serious concern. The room fell quiet for a long moment, the weight of the conversation settling over all of them. There's something else, Jiraiya said eventually, breaking the silence. Given the timing, I think it's worth accelerating a specific piece of your training. Real field conditions. A mission that lets you test the resonance under actual pressure, not just controlled sparring. Tsunade considered this, weighing the risk against the necessity. There's a border patrol request from the eastern outpost near the Land of Rivers. Minor territorial dispute, low-level skirmishes reported over the past week. Nothing Akatsuki scale, but real enough to be a genuine test. Send us, Naruto said immediately. I wasn't finished, Tsunade said, though there was the faintest hint of approval in her tone at his readiness. Kakashi, you'll accompany them. Full oversight, no unnecessary risks. If anything about this mission escalates beyond a standard border skirmish, you pull them out immediately. Understood? Understood, Kakashi said. They departed for the eastern border 2 days later, the mission briefing simple enough on its surface. Reinforce a small outpost dealing with increasingly bold incursions from a rival faction contesting the exact boundary line between Fire Country territory and a disputed stretch of River Valley. Nothing that should have required a squad of their caliber, ordinarily. But these weren't ordinary circumstances, and everyone involved understood the real purpose of the assignment even if it went unspoken. The outpost itself was a modest cluster of buildings nestled along the riverbank, staffed by a handful of Chunin who greeted Team 7's arrival with visible relief. We've had probing attacks almost every night this week, the outpost's ranking Chunin explained, a tired-looking woman named Etsuko who'd clearly been running on too little sleep for too many days. Small groups, testing our defenses, never quite committing to a full assault. We think they're softening us up before something bigger. Any idea who they are? Kakashi asked. Mercenaries, mostly, Etsuko said. Hired by someone with a grudge over river access rights, from what we've pieced together. Nothing state-sponsored, as far as we can tell, but they're better coordinated than your average bandit crew. That night, the pattern held true. A small group of 5 infiltrators attempted to slip past the outpost's perimeter under cover of darkness, only to find Team 7 waiting for them, having taken up quiet defensive positions along the most likely approach routes. The skirmish that followed was brief, almost anticlimactic compared to the scale of what they'd been preparing for. The infiltrators, clearly not expecting genuine shinobi resistance, were subdued within minutes, their coordination falling apart the moment real opposition materialized. That's disappointing, Sasuke muttered, securing the last of the restrained mercenaries with practiced efficiency. We trained for something bigger than this. Give it time, Kakashi said, watching the tree line with the faint, careful wariness of someone who suspected this had only been the opening move. He was right to suspect it. 3 nights later, the real test arrived. It began the same way the previous encounters had, a small group testing the perimeter under cover of darkness. But this time, the moment Team 7 moved to intercept, a much larger force revealed itself from concealed positions along both flanks, nearly 20 armed infiltrators converging on the outpost with clear, coordinated intent. This is the real assault, Kakashi said sharply, already moving into position. Stay together. Use what you've trained. Copy that, Naruto said, feeling Kurama's presence sharpen inside him, alert and focused. The fight that followed was nothing like the brief skirmish 3 nights earlier. The attacking force moved with genuine skill, clearly more experienced than the initial probing group, splitting into smaller units designed to overwhelm the outpost's defenders through sheer numbers and coordinated pressure. Sakura found herself quickly surrounded by 3 attackers, her enhanced strength and reflexes the only thing keeping her ahead of their combined assault, each exchange leaving faint cracks in the earth beneath her feet as she deflected blows with a force that would have shattered bone in an ordinary shinobi. A little help wouldn't hurt. she called out, ducking beneath a strike and countering with a chakra-enhanced kick that sent one attacker skidding backward into a tree. On it! Naruto called back, already cutting through the distance between them, shadow clones fanning out to intercept two more attackers converging from the flank. Sais and creations, meanwhile, had taken on a life of their own in the chaos of real combat. A swarm of ink hawks and serpents moving with startling independence, harrying attackers from multiple angles at once, buying crucial seconds for the rest of the team to regroup. They're adapting faster than expected, Sasuke called out, cutting down an attacker with a precise Chidori strike before pivoting to intercept another closing in on Sakura's exposed flank. This isn't just a border dispute. Someone trained these people specifically to counter shinobi tactics. Then let's give them something they didn't train for, Naruto said, and something in his voice made the others turn toward him even mid-fight. The resonance? Sakura asked, breathless, deflecting another strike. We've only tested it in sparring, Sasuke said warily. Not real combat. Not against a real threat. Then now's as good a time as any, Naruto said. Regroup. On my mark. The four of them fought their way toward a shared position despite the chaos around them, Kakashi holding the perimeter with practiced efficiency to buy them the seconds they needed. Once they stood together, back to back in a loose formation, Naruto felt the familiar warmth of Kurama's chakra stirring, and beside him, sensed the others reaching for the same shared thread. Now! He called. 4 surges of orange-red chakra flared simultaneously, and this time, unlike the careful, controlled demonstration for the council, there was no restraint at all. The threads of energy arced between them exactly as they had in training, but stronger now, sharper, driven by the genuine urgency of real combat. What followed was unlike anything the attacking force had prepared for. Sakura's strikes landed with an amplified force that sent bodies flying through the air. Sais and creations moved with startling new coordination, striking multiple targets simultaneously with an almost telepathic precision. Sasuke's Chidori, threaded through with the shared resonance, tore through defensive formations that should have held far longer than they did. And Naruto, standing at the center of it all, felt the 4 separate streams of chakra weave together into something that moved almost like a single, unified will. Within minutes, the attacking force that had seemed so overwhelming only moments earlier was in full retreat, their coordinated assault shattered by a level of combined power they clearly hadn't accounted for. Fall back! Someone shouted from the retreating enemy ranks, and the remaining attackers didn't need to be told twice. The outpost fell quiet in the aftermath, the adrenaline of battle slowly draining away as Team 7 regrouped near the perimeter, breathing hard but largely unharmed. That, Sakura said, staring at her own hands still faintly glowing with residual chakra, was completely different from training. Real stakes tend to sharpen things, Kakashi said, approaching from where he'd been holding the outer perimeter, his visible eye studying all 4 of them with something like genuine pride beneath the usual calm assessment. That was impressive work. All of you felt different, Sasuke admitted, flexing his hand slowly, watching the last traces of orange chakra fade from his fingertips. Like we weren't just fighting alongside each other, like we were fighting as one thing. That's exactly what it looked like from the outside, Kakashi said. I'll need to report the details back to Lady Tsunade, but I think it's safe to say the resonance holds up under real pressure. That's valuable information. Naruto allowed himself a tired grin, some of the tension of the past week finally easing from his shoulders. Guess all that miserable training actually paid off. Don't get too comfortable, Kakashi said, though there was warmth beneath the caution. This was a border skirmish. What we're actually worried about is considerably more dangerous than a group of hired mercenaries. The reminder settled over the group like a cold weight, tempering the relief of their victory with the knowledge of what still loomed ahead. They spent one more night at the outpost before beginning the journey back to Konoha, the mercenary attacks having ceased entirely following the previous night's decisive rout. Etsuko and the outpost Chunin were profusely grateful, insisting on providing the team with a proper meal before their departure. Grilled chicken and rice, fresh vegetables from the outpost's small garden, and pots of hot tea to ward off the evening chill. You 4 make quite a team, Etsuko said, watching them eat with evident curiosity, clearly having noticed at least some of the unusual chakra signatures during the fight, though tactfully choosing not to press for details she likely wasn't cleared to know. Whatever's going on with you, it's working. We're figuring it out as we go, Naruto said, grinning around the mouthful of chicken. Aren't we all? Atsuko said, with a tired but genuine laugh. That evening, as the team settled in for a final night's rest before the journey home, Naruto found himself sitting alone near the riverbank, staring out at the dark water reflecting the moonlight, turning the events of the past weeks over in his mind. You've come a long way in a short time, Kurama said quietly. The fox's presence settled and calm inside him for once, none of the earlier fury or uncertainty coloring the observation. All four of you. Feels like we're just getting started, Naruto said quietly. Akatsuki knowing about this. That's not the end of anything. That's just the beginning of something a lot scarier. Perhaps, Kurama agreed. But you handled tonight well. Better than I expected, given how recently all of this began. Naruto smiled faintly at that, small and genuine. Was that a compliment? Don't get used to it, Kurama said, though there was something almost like warmth buried in the gruffness. Naruto's smile lingered a moment longer before fading into something more thoughtful. Do you think it'll ever feel normal? All of this? Kurama was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with more weight than Naruto expected. I don't know, the fox admitted finally. Nothing about this has been normal from the start. But I've noticed something, watching the four of you these past weeks. There's a kind of strength in this that goes beyond raw power. A trust, built out of necessity, that none of you had to earn the easy way. That almost sounded philosophical, Naruto said, grinning again. Don't push it, Kurama grumbled, and Naruto laughed quietly, the sound carrying out over the dark water. Their journey back to Konoha was uneventful, a welcome contrast to the tension of the outpost, and the team returned home with a quiet, cautious sense of accomplishment that hadn't been there when they left. But far behind them, in the shadowed tree line just beyond the village's outer wall, a pale, unnervingly split figure had already been watching for the better part of 2 days, patient and silent, gathering exactly the kind of information Pain had requested. Zetsu's white half-watch Team 7 passed through the village gates with open, unsettling interest, cataloging every detail, the faint orange chakra signature still lingering around all four of them, the visible ease with which they moved together despite obvious exhaustion, the protective, watchful presence of the silver-haired Jonin who never strayed far from their side. Interesting, the white half murmured, low enough that even the wind barely carried the sound. So this is what a fractured-tailed beast looks like, spread across four young hosts. The black half remained silent for a long moment, studying the same scene with a colder, more calculating focus. Young, it finally said, the single word carrying a weight of grim implication. Untested against anything close to our level. This will be easier than the others expected, or considerably more complicated, the white half countered, almost cheerfully. For separate anchors means for separate chances for something to go wrong in extraction. Pain will want every detail before deciding how to proceed. Then let's give him every detail, the black half said. Zetsu melted back into the shadow of the tree line, having seen enough for now, slipping away from Konoha's walls with the same silent, unnoticed ease with which it had arrived, leaving behind a village that had just successfully weathered one crisis, utterly unaware that a far greater one had already come, watched, and gone. Tsunade's office, 2 days after Team 7's return from the eastern border, was considerably calmer than it had been during the previous briefing, though calm, in this particular story, never seemed to last very long. The border skirmish went about as well as we could have hoped, Kakashi reported, standing at ease in front of Tsunade's desk while Jiraiya leaned against the window frame nearby, arms crossed, listening with obvious interest. The mercenary force retreated after the second engagement, and hasn't returned. More importantly, the resonance effect held up under genuine combat pressure, not just sparring conditions. Tsunade's eyebrows rose slightly. Describe it. When all four of them draw on the shared chakra simultaneously, in close proximity, their individual outputs don't just combine, Kakashi said. They amplify each other. Sakura's strength, size and constructs, Sasuke's Chidori, Naruto's overall control, all of it sharpened, faster, more precise than any of them could manage independently. That tracks with what we saw during the training exercise, Jiraiya added. But field conditions gave us a clearer picture of the scale. Whatever's happening between them isn't just four people sharing a power source. It's something closer to a single consciousness briefly extending across four bodies. Tsunade sat back in her chair, considering this with the particular focus she reserved for problems that were simultaneously promising and deeply unsettling. That's either the greatest tactical advantage this village has ever produced, she said slowly, or the single greatest liability, depending entirely on how well they can control it. Which is exactly why I think we should build on it deliberately, Kakashi said. Rather than treating the resonance as something that happens by accident under pressure, we train it directly. Teach them to access it on command, understand its limits, and recognize when it becomes dangerous rather than discovering that the hard way in the middle of a real fight. Tsunade considered this for a long moment before nodding. Agreed. I want you and Jiraiya running dedicated resonance training starting immediately. But I also want honest answers about the risks. If drawing on this connection puts unnecessary strain on any of them, especially Naruto, given his already reduced reserves, I need to know before it becomes a problem in the field. Understood, Kakashi said. Training Ground 44's outer clearing had, by this point, become something like a second home for Team 7, familiar enough that the four of them barely registered the walk there anymore, falling into an easy, comfortable rhythm as they made their way through the village each morning. All right, Jiraiya said, once they'd all gathered, today we're doing something different. Instead of just testing what happens when you draw on the shared chakra under pressure, I want to understand the actual mechanics of it. How does it start? What triggers it? Can you access it deliberately, calmly, without the adrenaline of combat pushing you into it? Worth finding out, Naruto said, already feeling a familiar, cautious curiosity stirring in his chest. Inside him, Kurama's presence had settled into something quieter, more attentive. The fox, it seemed, was just as interested in understanding this new phenomenon as everyone else. Let's start slow, Kakashi said. Naruto, Sakura, Sasuke, Sai stand in a loose circle, facing inward. Close your eyes if it helps. Focus on the chakra you each carry, and instead of drawing on it individually, try reaching toward each other with it. See what happens. The four of them arranged themselves as instructed, and for a long moment, nothing happened at all beyond the ordinary hum of individual chakra signatures settling into stillness. I don't feel anything different, Sakura admitted after a minute, eyes still closed, brow furrowed in concentration. Try not to force it, Naruto suggested. During the fight at the outpost, it just kind of happened. Once we were standing together, and reaching for it at the same time. That's helpful information, actually, Jiraiya said, watching closely. Suggests the resonance responds to shared intent rather than pure proximity. You need to actually be reaching for the same thing simultaneously, not just standing near each other. Shared intent, Sasuke repeated slowly, testing the phrase. All right. Let's try that. Everyone on 3, focus on reaching toward the other specifically, not just accessing your own chakra. They tried again, and this time, something flickered, faint, barely perceptible, a thin thread of warmth passing between the four of them like the first whisper of static before a storm. There, Kakashi said quietly, watching closely. Did you all feel that? Yeah, Sakura breathed, eyes opening in mild wonder. Just for a second. Like something reaching back. Do it again, Jiraiya said. Same approach. Let's see if you can hold it longer this time. They repeated the exercise, and slowly, painstakingly, over the course of the next several hours, began to develop something like genuine control over the resonance. No longer something that only emerged in the desperate heat of real combat, but a deliberate, conscious connection they could reach for and sustain, at least for short periods, through careful, coordinated focus. This is incredible, Sakura said during a brief rest between exercises, staring at her own hands with an expression of open fascination. It's like I can feel the edges of what you're all feeling, just faintly, when we do this. Not thoughts, exactly. More like presence. I've read about bonds between summoning contracts that produce something vaguely similar, Sai offered, sketching quick notes in his book between exercises. Though nothing quite this direct between 4 individual humans. Feels different for me too, Sasuke admitted, and there was something almost reluctant in the admission, like he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to say it out loud. Less like borrowing power. More like, I don't know. Being part of something bigger than just myself. Naruto glanced at him, mildly surprised by the openness of that statement coming from Sasuke, of all people. That a good thing or a bad thing? Sasuke considered the question seriously, which was itself unusual enough to make Sakura raise an eyebrow. I'm still deciding, he said finally. But it's not a bad thing. Not anymore. That admission, quiet, understated, and entirely genuine, landed with more weight than either of them fully acknowledged in the moment, but Naruto felt something ease in his own chest at hearing it. Weeks of guilt, of wondering whether he made an unforgivable choice on Sasuke's behalf, softened just slightly at the simple honesty of that answer. Over the following days, the resonance training deepened considerably, moving beyond simple combined strikes into something more nuanced and useful. Kakashi and Jiraiya worked with the team to identify specific applications for the shared connection, moments where amplified strength or coordinated precision could turn the tide of a fight, and moments where drawing on the resonance carelessly might actually work against them, draining reserves faster than any of them could easily recover. The key thing to understand, Jiraiya explained, during one particularly grueling afternoon session, is that this isn't a resource you can tap indefinitely. Every time you draw on the resonance, you're pulling from all four of you simultaneously, not just one. That means the strain compounds faster than any of you might expect. So it's a last resort, Sasuke said, not something to lean on constantly. Exactly, Jiraiya said. Use it wisely. Save it for moments that genuinely call for it. Otherwise you risk exhausting all four of you at once, which is a considerably worse position to be in than any of you running low individually. Naruto absorbed this carefully, and inside him, felt Kurama's quiet agreement with the assessment. He's not wrong, the fox murmured. Every time you all reach for the resonance, it pulls on the core of what I am, spread thin across 4 separate points. It is not without cost. Never forget that. I won't, Naruto promised silently. Alongside the tactical training, something else was happening within the team, something less measurable by any chakra reading or combat drill, but no less significant. The daily hours spent training together, pushing through exhaustion and frustration side by side, had begun quietly reshaping the dynamic between all four of them. Sakura, who had spent years feeling like the weakest member of the team compared to Naruto's raw stamina and Sasuke's natural talent, found herself, for the first time, genuinely operating as an equal contributor rather than someone constantly playing catch-up. Her enhanced strength and precision, paired with her medical expertise, made her an indispensable anchor for the team's combined efforts, not a supporting piece, but a genuine pillar. You've gotten a lot more confident, Naruto observed one evening, as they walked back from training together, Sakura's steps noticeably lighter than they'd been in weeks. I feel more confident, Sakura admitted. It's strange. I spent so long feeling like I was always one step behind you and Sasuke. Now, when we fight together, I don't feel behind at all. I feel like I actually belong there. You always belong there, Naruto said, a little more firmly than he meant to. This didn't create that. It just helped you see it. Sakura glanced at him, something warm and a little surprised flickering across her expression at the sincerity in his voice. Thanks, Naruto. Don't mention it, he said, grinning, some of the old easy warmth between them settling back into place. Sai's relationship with his own abilities had shifted as well, the initial unease over his ink creation's newfound independence giving way to something closer to genuine partnership. He'd taken to sketching detailed notes after every training session, cataloging the subtle differences in how his creations responded under various emotional and tactical conditions, treating the entire process with the same careful, methodical curiosity he brought to everything else in his life. I believe I've begun to understand the pattern, he told Kakashi one afternoon, showing him pages of careful diagrams. The ink responds most independently when I approach a creation with clear intent but loose specific instruction. It seems to fill in the details itself, in a way that feels almost collaborative rather than purely directive. That's a healthy way to think about it, Kakashi said, genuinely impressed. Rather than fighting the independence, you're learning to work alongside it. I find I prefer it this way, Sai admitted, something almost like quiet contentment in his usually carefully neutral tone. It feels less like commanding a tool and more like cooperating with something that has its own perspective. I find that I don't mind it. And Sasuke, quiet, guarded Sasuke, who had spent so many years defining his own strength purely in terms of what he alone could achieve, found himself, gradually and almost against his own expectations, settling into something that looked remarkably like trust. It happened in small moments, mostly. A training exercise where Sakura caught a strike meant for his blind side before he even registered the danger. A moment where Sai's ink construct intercepted an attack aimed at his back during a sparring match, buying him the half-second he needed to recover. A quiet evening where Naruto, without any particular fanfare, simply handed him a cup of tea after a brutal training session and sat down beside him without saying anything at all, just present, just there. "You've been different lately," Sakura observed one evening, watching Sasuke help Sai adjust the tension in his ink brush stroke during a break in training, a small, unremarkable act of assistance that, a few months earlier, would have seemed entirely out of character for him. "Have I?" Sasuke asked, not quite meeting her eyes. "You have," Sakura said. "Good different, I mean." "It's nice." Sasuke didn't answer right away, considering the observation with the same careful seriousness he brought to most things. "I spent a long time believing I had to carry everything myself," he admitted finally, quietly, the honesty costing him something even as he said it. That needing anyone else was a weakness. He gestured vaguely at the faint orange glow still occasionally flickering at his fingertips during particularly intense training moments. "This forced me to stop believing that, whether I wanted to or not." "And now?" Sakura asked gently. "Now," Sasuke said, "I think I was wrong. About a lot of things." It wasn't a dramatic confession. It wasn't delivered with any particular weight or ceremony. But it was, in its own understated way, one of the most significant things Sasuke Uchiha had said to either of them in years, and Sakura recognized it for exactly what it was. Naruto's own journey through this period took a different shape entirely. Less about learning to trust others, and more about understanding, finally, the true depth of what he'd given away, and what remained. One evening, sitting alone by the edge of the training grounds after the others had already headed home, he found himself in a longer, more searching conversation with Kurama than they'd had in weeks. "You've been quiet lately," Naruto said, watching the last light of the sunset fade behind the tree line. "More than usual, I mean." "Ever since the fracture. I've had a great deal to consider," Kurama admitted. "Being divided is not something I anticipated ever experiencing. I find myself adjusting to a version of existence I never expected to occupy." "Is it bad?" Naruto asked, the old guilt resurfacing, familiar and heavy. "Being split up like this?" Kurama was quiet for a long moment, and when the fox finally answered, there was something in the tone Naruto hadn't heard before, a kind of careful, considered honesty that felt different from the fox's usual gruff pragmatism. "It is strange," Kurama said slowly. "I spent centuries as a single, whole being, defined entirely by my own boundaries. Being fractured felt, at first, like a violation of everything I understood myself to be. But I have come to notice something in these past weeks, watching the four of you train and grow together." "What's that?" Naruto asked. "I am still whole," Kurama said, in a way I did not expect. "Divided across four vessels, yes. But when the four of you reach for the resonance together, I feel whole, briefly, in a way I have not felt since long before I was ever sealed into anyone at all. It is not the same as being undivided, but it is not entirely a loss either." Naruto sat with that for a long moment, something warm and unexpected settling in his chest at the admission. "So it's not just costing you something. It's giving you something too." "Perhaps," Kurama said, and Naruto could have sworn there was something almost like reluctant fondness in the single word. "I would not have chosen this path, if given the option in advance. But I find myself less resentful of it than I expected to be." "That's actually kind of nice to hear," Naruto admitted, smiling faintly into the darkening sky. "Don't get sentimental about it," Kurama grumbled, though the warmth beneath the gruffness was impossible to miss now. Naruto laughed quietly, the sound carrying out over the empty training ground, and for the first time in what felt like a very long time, allowed himself to simply enjoy a moment of genuine peace. That peace, as these things tend to go, didn't last especially long. It was nearly a week into the dedicated resonance training, during a particularly focused evening session, that things took an unexpected and deeply unsettling turn. The team had gathered for one final exercise of the day, working on sustaining the resonance connection for extended periods rather than just brief bursts, a skill Kakashi and Jiraiya believed would prove valuable if a real confrontation ever required sustained combined effort rather than a single decisive strike. They stood in their now familiar circle, chakra threading between them in the steady, practiced way they'd cultivated over the past week, the connection humming quietly at the edge of perception like a held breath. And then, without warning, all four of them gasped simultaneously, hands flying to their chests as a sharp, foreign pulse of pain lanced through the shared connection. Not physical injury, nothing that corresponded to any wound, but something that felt disturbingly like an outside pressure testing the boundaries of the resonance itself. What was that? Sakura gasped, staggering slightly, one hand pressed hard against her sternum. Everyone all right? Kakashi asked sharply, immediately alert, closing the distance toward the group. I don't know, Naruto said, breathing hard, Kurama's presence inside him suddenly sharp and alarmed in a way it hadn't been moments earlier. That wasn't training. That wasn't us. Kurama, Naruto said internally, urgency spiking through the thought. What was that? For a long, tense moment, Kurama didn't answer immediately, and Naruto could feel the fox's attention turn sharply outward, searching, alarmed. Someone, Kurama said finally, voice low and grave, just attempted to test the boundaries of the fracture from a considerable distance. Probing whether the connection between the four of you could be traced, or exploited. Naruto's blood ran cold. Someone's testing us, he said out loud, relaying the information as fast as he could get the words out. From far away. Trying to see if they can track the connection between us. Sasuke's expression hardened instantly. Akatsuki? We don't know that for certain, Kakashi said, though the careful, controlled tension in his voice suggested he considered it far more likely than he wanted to admit out loud. Who else would have any reason to test something like this? Sasuke pressed. Who else even knows this connection exists in a form that could be probed from a distance? Nobody had a good answer to that, and the silence that followed carried its own grim confirmation. We need to report this to Lady Tsunade immediately, Kakashi said, already moving, sharp urgency replacing his usual easy calm. All of you, stay close together. If this was a deliberate test, whoever performed it now has information about how the resonance responds under remote observation. That's not something we can afford to take lightly. The team moved quickly back toward the village, the earlier warmth and comfort of their training session replaced by a taut, watchful tension that none of them fully shook off for the rest of the evening. Inside Naruto, Kurama's presence remained sharp and alert, turned outward, searching for any further trace of whatever had reached across that impossible distance to test the fragile, hard-won connection they'd spent the past week learning to trust. This is only the beginning, the fox said quietly, once the village gates finally came into view. Whoever did this now understands something about you four that they did not understand before, and they will use that understanding, sooner rather than later. Naruto's jaw tightened, the earlier piece of the evening feeling impossibly distant now. Then we'll be ready, he said, with more confidence than he entirely felt. I hope so, Kurama said. Because I do not believe we will have much longer to prepare.